recording. All right. So I like to start all of this by asking people. All right. So if you guys know someone that's had cancer, okay? If you have a family member, a family friend, somebody that you are, that your parents know, or you just know someone that has had cancer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull everybody up here on those things. So if you guys have done that, like flash your cameras at us or something. So my people in class, hands up. You guys know somebody that's had cancer? Okay, so almost everybody. Okay, and then almost at least half of the people are slowly putting things in there on. Okay, so in much the same way that cardiovascular disease is a thing that will affect pretty much everybody. Okay, you're going to know someone that has a form of cardiovascular disease, someone that matters to you. The stats are a little bit less frightening on cancer, but as you guys put your hands up, almost everybody knows somebody that's had cancer. Almost all of you at some point in your life, especially as you get older, you will have somebody that you care about that's going to have cancer. If not, that's going to probably die because of cancer. Okay. Second leading cause of death in the US. We're getting better. We're getting a lot better at how we kind of treat and diagnose cancer, but it's still a really, really, really big deal. Okay. So I think the best place to start with all of this, I'm sure you guys talk about this in intro to Zoe or intro to bio, whatever it's called now, or in human phys, but cancers are cells that are growing uncontrollably in an abnormal manner. Okay, they're cells that are growing when they're not supposed to, or they're growing so rapidly in some ways that it is in some ways abnormal. Okay, so typically, okay, the group of cells, which you can see here that I've circled in all of this, the group of cells that are growing uncontrollably are often referred to as a tumor. Okay, we sometimes call a tumor a neoplasm. All right, but it's just this group or collection of cells, and they all very likely began from the same cell. Okay, so Ramsey makes a copy of herself, and the copy makes a copy, and a copy, and a copy, and a copy. We look up, we've got 17 Ramseys here that are all sort of in class with us. Okay, that's kind of what happens when you get cancerous cell growth. Okay, and so there's a couple of things that we need to be aware of. All right, if you look at the picture of these cells, do they look different? Or do these cells look different than kind of the regular? We assume that these are sort of epithelial cells or something, and then here's our kind of tumor cells. Do they look different? Yes. They look bigger, okay? Anything else look different about them? The nuclei are very large and pronounced, okay? What do the cells look like themselves, like shape-wise in comparison to the other ones? They're not uniform, they're highly sour. Okay. One of the things that characterizes cancerous cells, okay, and this is one of the ways that a pathologist, when you take a biopsy or you take a piece of tissue, that they're looking for when they look at these cells under a microscope, is what do the edges and the kind of the shape of the cells look like? Normal cells in most places are very regular. Okay, whatever one cell type looks like, a lot of the rest of them all look roughly the same. Okay, with cancer cells, though, they are a hot mess. Okay, they're all over the place. Every cell looks a little bit different. They don't have nice, cleanly defined kind of edges and borders and the like. And that's one of the ways that we're going to try to look at these things. Okay, so last year, we had a possible tumor taken off the side of one of our dogs, and the vets looked at it under the thing, and what they were excited about was that no, the cells didn't have this. It's, oh, they've got very nice, well-defined, clean edges. So if they take stuff out, that's one of the ways that they know they've gotten the entire thing, is that at the edge of whatever they've cut out, there's this nice, clean, kind of regular looking kind of border cells. Okay, so that's one of the things that we're gonna notice about cancerous cells. Okay, so we classify or we name cancer cells based upon their tissue of origin. Okay, so or really it's the cell type that it originated from. So you kind of name them by the cell type and then their tissue of origin. All right, so you may hear things referred to as a carcinoma. So about 80% of all cancers are carcinomas. Carcinomas come from epithelial cells. Okay, they come from epithelial cells. Most of the time, let's just say you have skin cancer. Okay, if you have skin cancer, then what you're going to have is you're going to have cancer of the skin epithelium. Okay. Leukemias are going to originate from hematopoietic cells, which are going to be in the bone marrow. Okay. So leukemias are going to come from lymphomas, come from white blood cells. They come from lymphocytes. Okay. And then sarcomas come from mesenchymal cells, which are things that are going to generally be made up of connective tissue. Okay. And there are some other ones, but these are kind of the four sort of big kind of groups of areas that we're going to have. Okay, so you may have a carcinoma, so it's an epithelial cell, but it is, let's say, their lung epithelial cells versus skin epithelial cells. All right, so that's how we name, that's how we tend to name where cancers are coming from. Okay, so where they originate from, like the kind of cell that they come from, is going to potentially play some role in how we treat them and the potential sort of diagnosis and severity of those. Okay, so scary stats as always. Okay, guys, half of us will have cancer at some point in our lives. Ladies, about a third of y'all will have cancer at some point in your lives. Okay, guys, in many ways, our prostate is a collection of cancerous cells. It's been growing since you were little. Okay, so you can have a cancer that can come from pretty much any organ, and the big issue, or one of the big issues that makes cancer so deadly, is that they can do something that we call metastasize. And if they metastasize, that means they leave the tissue where they've originated and they spread to a different tissue. Okay, and so sometimes what you may find is they've located a tumor, and then they biopsy the tumor and they figure out that that tumor, those cells shouldn't be there. They did not originate there. Okay, so you've got what look like skin cancer cells in your lungs, okay, or lung cancer cells in your skin or in your liver or someplace. Okay, and so we'll talk about why when they leave their sort of site of origin that is potentially so dangerous. We'll talk a little bit more about why kind of the really nasty, kind of uncontrollable growing ones, why they tend to cause so much tissue damage. Okay, so they account for roughly 25% of all deaths in the U.S. There's somewhere between 1 million and 1.5 million cases that are diagnosed every year. Huge billions and billions, hundreds of billions of dollars in healthcare costs. Okay, these are a very large, very important public health issue right now. Okay, the good thing is that the 5-year survival rate is going up. Okay, so right now, 5-year survival rate on cancer, so if you group all cancers together, is about 65%. What that means is that 65% of people that are diagnosed with cancer will live another 5 years. Okay, that's how we measure survival with cancer. It's not how many people live 20 years, or the cancer goes completely away. We measure it in sort of 5-year chunks. Okay, and that may not seem like a particularly great thing, but what tends to happen is if you have cancer once, you're at an increased risk of having cancer again, and so very often they will tend to come back. So this rate is going up. This is good, especially for the most common kinds of cancer, which we'll talk about in a little bit later on. But in the most common kinds of cancer, our ability to diagnose and survive those is getting better. Okay, so when you have cancerous cells, or when you have a tumor, we tend to group those things into two groups. Okay, what we call benign tumors, and what we call malignant tumors. Okay, now some people would argue that a benign tumor really isn't cancerous because it's not that uncontrollable of growing, and the cells kind of all they don't look too different than regular cells. But benign tumors, okay, typically are not going to be fatal. They're not going to leave their tissue of origin, and they tend to be what we would call encapsulated and more organized. Okay, so you've got a benign tumor, all of those cells are kind of all contained within their own little capsule, right? Their own little area. They're not going to escape, and they look more like regular cells than a malignant. The other really big thing about benign tumors is they tend to grow relatively slowly if they're growing at all. Okay? If they're growing at all. So that makes them benign. The big issue, though, is that they're not going to go very fast. They're not going to take a lot of blood flow because of that reason, and they're not going to leave their tissue. Okay? Malignant cancers, on the other hand, okay, they grow really, really fast. They grow really fast. Okay? The other thing that they want to do, because they grow so fast, they leave their tissue of origin and they try to go off and go and replicate in a different tissue as well. Okay? Going to invade other tissues. The reason that, and this is an issue for most cancers and why most the malignant cancers tend to be so dangerous, is that what happens is simply having uncontrolled cell growth isn't always in and of itself a terrible, terrible thing. But what happens is you get uncontrolled cell growth. Those cells need lots of energy, therefore they need lots of blood flow and lots of nutrients. And so what happens is they, in essence, take away blood flow and nutrients from the otherwise healthy tissue. And because of that, then the healthy tissue around those cancer cells begin to die. We call that necrosis. Okay? Call that necrosis. Yes, they are sweeping leaves outdoors. Seems an odd day for that because the wind is blowing so much. Okay, but that's what's going to happen. So you start off, you've got these normal, right? We have these normal cancer, these normal cells here, epithelial cells. You get some that become somewhat cancerous. You might consider them benign, at least initially, right? These are your abnormal cell growth. They begin, right? They're beginning to sort of replicate and become kind of very malignant-esque. And then they start to grab and take blood flow away from this other tissue. There's going to be lots of what we call angiogenesis that's going to occur. So blood vessels are going to be made and kind of make new blood vessels around to supply nutrients to those cancer cells. And then that's when we begin to starve the other tissue of their blood flow. Okay? Okay. So how do you get cancer? Okay. How do we get cancer? McKenna, have you ever been outside? Okay. Have you ever sat out in the sun at any point, maybe by a pool or on a beach or someplace? Okay. Guess what you've probably done? Put yourself at risk of developing cancer. Anytime you walk outside, okay? Anybody ever had an x-ray? Put in an X-ray. Okay. They put the lead sort of thing over you. Usually they'll put it like this. They'll put them over your ovaries. Okay. Guys, they try to put them over your testes. The reason that we do this is cancers develop due to changes in the genes, okay, in normal cells. Those genetic changes we call mutations, okay? We call those things mutations. Mutations can be caused by, as we will talk about a little bit later, by ultraviolet light. They can be caused by X-rays. They can be caused by exposure to certain chemicals, okay? But some of the most common ones are UV light and ionizing radiation, and then certain chemicals that may or may not exist in the water that we drink here in Norman. Okay. So that's what's going to happen. And so in a normal cell, okay, that cell contains the instructions for making copies of itself, right? It knows how to make a twin. It knows how to undergo a process called mitosis, right? When you undergo this, something gets turned on or something gets turned off, and it tells that cell, make a copy. Well, when we get a mutation that occurs in certain genes in that normal cell, if we turn on the gene that says replicate, then we'll start making new copies. There are also some genes that stop or prevent replication. And if we mutate the stop genes and they don't work anymore, then we may also get replication. Right? Does that make sense, guys? You guys kind of understand how that can go? But the end result is there's a change in the DNA, and it may be in one single base pair, in one single gene. And the consequence of all of that is that now the cell gets turned on to replicate, and there's no way to turn it off. Okay? So you get one cell, it makes 2, then it makes 4, then it makes 8, and then we're off to the races with all of these sorts of things. Okay? So I assume that they cover this in Intro to Zoo and in Human Phys. You guys have talked about how we take DNA and we make RNA and we turn RNA into proteins, like how all of this replication cycle works. Yes? Okay. So this is the normal process, right? You take DNA, right? You use DNA polymerase or RNA polymerase. We unzip the DNA, and then we're going to transcribe some RNA out of all of that. The RNA contains the sort of the signals or the what the right word is, the code in essence to make certain proteins, and that process is called translation. So we transcribe RNA. The RNA then get made into proteins, and so now we've got more of that protein in the cell. But if I want to replicate a cell, then I got to make sort of new versions of everything in that cell. Okay, and all of that information is contained within the DNA to make the correct RNAs to cause these things to happen. Okay, so DNA is in the nucleus. So here's the nucleus of our cell right here. Okay. We make proteins for the most part here in the endoplasmic reticulum, which is going to have ribosomes in it. And so all of this stuff in conjunction with the Golgi is where we're going to make sort of our proteins, and we're going to control kind of the production of all of these things. So the genes are in the DNA. They're in the chromosomes, the DNA here in the nucleus. Those things make RNA, and the endoplasmic reticulum ribosomes make proteins. And then that's going to be sort of where we're going to get all of the new things for our cell. Okay. All right. So most cells, and I apologize if this kind of has this corkscrew look to it and everything here. This is part of the reason why it might be useful to have a clean version of these slides. Most cells exist at a certain place once they have matured in what we refer to as their cell cycle. Okay. When a cell first is being developed, okay, when it's first going to be developed, it grows up to a certain place, and then it stops, and it arrests in what we call a G0 phase, which you guys can see here, okay? So here's most of the cells, or a lot of the cells in your body, they develop and they're stuck in G0 phase. That's good, okay? But at some point, we can give a particular signal to the cell, and it will move out of G0 and it will go into G1 phase. Okay. And as it goes into G1, it's going to make a copy of everything that's happening. Okay. Make a copy. Then we're going to we copy our chromosomes, we double all of those things out, then we divide our cell kind of down the middle, and we go from having one cell now into two identical cells, right? That's going to get us right through G2 and into something that's called mitosis or cytokinesis, where it actually begins to split apart. Then usually what happens is, in an ideal world, one of these cells is going to die, and then the other one is going to arrest again in G0 phase. Okay. Well, in cancerous cells, we turn off the signal that tells it to go back into G0. We turn off the signal that says stop doing this. Okay. And in other instances, we also kind of chronically turn on the signal that says go from G0 into G1. Okay. So you're just constantly in this sort of cycle where it is, right, where it's turn on, make a new copy of yourself, make another copy of yourself, make another copy of yourself, on and on and on and on. And that's why you end up with all of these cells. Okay. So the main causes of the mutations that lead to this uncontrolled cell growth are potentially the products of cellular metabolism. Things called oxygen-free radicals can at times damage the DNA. Okay. Big ones are exposure to UV light, right? So excess exposure to sunlight. Okay. Ionizing radiation, and this is X-rays, or I don't know, pick your other sort of form of radiation that you're sort of fond of if you're a science fiction fan here. Okay, the ionizing radiation and the chemical exposure are probably the two largest. Think exposure to, say, asbestos or things like that. Okay, and then there's always going to be a chance that there are replication errors. When a cell divides, you make new red blood cells every 90 to 120 days. There's always a chance that when that happens, that you will make a mistake. Okay. Called a spot mutation. If you make a mistake, it just happens to be in one of the genes that controls cell growth. Now, potentially a random mistake has potentially not made a cell that doesn't work, but it's made a cell that's going to divide over and over and over again. Okay? So the good thing that happens, okay, the good thing that happens is when you get DNA damage or you get a replication error, so that we've changed the genetic code a little bit, is 99.999% of the time, the body catches it, okay? There's a reasonable chance that every one of us in class has cells that could potentially develop into cancerous cells in our body right now, okay? You have cells that have a sufficient mutation that could, if not caught, lead to this, okay? But almost all the time, we catch them, all right? Either the mutation itself makes the cells where they don't work right, or as they begin to sort of proliferate uncontrollably, we can either repair the DNA, okay, or we catch them and we tell the cells to undergo something called apoptosis, which is programmed cell death, okay? The cell and the immune system catch these things and realize this is not how this is supposed to work. Let's kill off this cell and hope for the best. Okay? So most of the time this happens, but because it happens often, okay, there's always a chance that about 1 in 5 people, that at some point in your life, you're going to have one of these that gets through and then becomes a cancer cell. Okay. So you guys don't have to You don't have to know or understand all of these kind of individual genes and things that are going on. But what you see here, this is several possible ways that we have molecular mechanisms that lead to what's called apoptosis. And if these things get activated in response to DNA damage, then you're either going to activate something called a caspase, okay, which sort of breaks down a lot of the things in the cells and causes apoptosis. You're going to activate autophagy, which is then going to also lead to cell death in this way, where the cells may get eaten up by macrophages and those kinds of things. Or there may be even some other things where the cells are starved of things and they sort of die through necrosis. Okay? But these are sort of normal things that would happen if, for whatever reason, we catch the fact that there's been a mutation. Right? If these don't happen, then the cells are allowed to continue to divide and proliferate, and cancer develops. Okay. Okay. So this is where it's probably worth talking about something called oncogenes and proto-oncogenes. Oncogenes are specific genes in your DNA that, if they get a mutation in them, oftentimes lead to the development of cancer. Okay? Lead to the development of cancer. So they may be genes that turn on cell proliferation, or they may be genes that turn off cell proliferation. And so you may get a mutation in an oncogene and it tells that cell to just divide uncontrollably. Or some of your cells divide pretty often anyway, but they have these stop signals in them to keep them from doing it too often. And if you get a mutation in those oncogenes, then it stops the signal to tell them stop. So they just do their normal replication, but it goes on over and over and over again. So it goes too fast. Okay? So that's what oncogenes are. That's kind of the distinction that we make about all of those things. Okay? Additionally, there are genes in your DNA that we call tumor suppressor genes. Okay? So tumor suppressor genes are things that prevent uncontrolled cell growth. So in some ways, like the genes that code for stopping proliferation, if you get a mutation in a tumor suppressor gene so it doesn't suppress anymore, then you're still going to get uncontrolled cell growth. Okay? So there are multiple places and multiple options where we can either turn the cell on or we can remove the stop signals, and we end up in the same place. Okay? Does that make sense? You guys with me? All right. Okay. All right. Let's talk about risk factors. Okay. Who is at risk of developing cancer? Right. Well, the short answer is everyone. Everybody is at risk of developing cancer. Okay. But if we look at this, there are some things that may predispose certain people to be at a greater risk than others. Okay. For some kinds of cancers, heredity is really, really important. Okay. Some cancers run in families, but it's only a relatively small percentage. Okay. Most mutations that lead to cancer are not things that are passed on from parent to child. Okay. So what we do seem to see is that breast cancer, ovarian cancer, colon cancer, prostate cancer. So cancer is in some ways related to sex hormone, but you guys will see sex hormones drive cell proliferation, and therefore sex hormone levels tend to be very often related to the development of cancers. And then colon cancer appear to have the greatest familial links. Okay. And so what that means in some people is that if your mom has breast cancer, ovarian cancer, your dad has prostate cancer, or either of them has colon cancer, then you may be at an increased risk of those things. But it's not a huge amount of an increased risk. Okay. So the sort of most common way to increase your risk of developing cancers, though, is to expose yourself to what we call carcinogens. Okay? A carcinogen is anything that can increase your risk of developing cancer. There are things that tend to induce mutations. Okay? So if we look at these, there are things that we would call environmental carcinogens. Smoking, tobacco use, okay? Ultraviolet light, pollutants, chemicals, your diet and being sedentary, alcohol consumption, and then especially levels of hormones like estrogen and testosterone. So one of the things that we know, smoking is probably one of the leading causes or preventable causes of cancers. Okay. And then obesity tends to be another one, right? And so some parts of the obesity, which may be related both to your diet and being sedentary, obesity tends to interact, excess body fat tends to interact, especially with estrogen, to play some role in the development of breast cancer. Okay? It tends to play some role in the development of colorectal cancer. So these are going to be big things. Now, if you look at a lot of these things, some of these risk factors look like the cardiovascular disease risk factors. They look like things that we can potentially moderate with physical activity. Okay? All right. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to put everybody in breakout rooms. Please do not cheat. Okay? Here's what we're going to do. Each breakout room, and then the folks in class, you guys are going to, you're going to put together a list, okay, of what you think are the 10 most common forms of cancer and the 10 deadliest cancers, okay? And then we're going to play a little family feud based upon all of that, okay? So I'm going to, all right. So what we're going to do is we're going to let the Zoom people see if they got some that our in-class folks had. So let's start with this. Emma, you're at the top of our thing. Emma, who is in your group?
Jordan and Dan.
Okay, Jordan and Dan. Give us what you guys thought was the most common form of cancer.
Like our 10.
Just give me one of the 10.
Breast.
Breast cancer. Okay. In-class people, did y'all have breast cancer on your list? Yes. Yes. Okay. Hannah, did you guys have breast cancer on your list?
Yes.
Hannah sounds very perturbed that I called on her. So, or thought that was the most obvious answer in the history of everything. Of course, breast cancer is on the list. Okay. So let's do a different one. Hannah, your group, who's in your group?
Lana and Mallory.
Anna and Mallory. Okay. So give us one that was on y'all's list that wasn't breast cancer.
Lung cancer.
Lung cancer. Okay. In-class folks, do we have lung cancer? Yes. We have lung cancer. Anybody not have lung cancer? Okay. Fair. Matthew. Matthew, can you hear me?
Hello? Yeah.
Okay, let me guess. Was Jordan and Devin your group?
No, I was with Madison and Cameron.
Oh, okay. Well, that's weird. Y'all were lined up. The other groups were lined up on my screen. Okay. So you guys give us one. What one did you guys have? One that was not breast cancer or lung cancer?
Pancreatic cancer.
Pancreatic? Do we get pancreatic folks? Yes. Okay. All right. Taylor,
Yes.
can you give us one?
Skin cancer.
Skin cancer. Okay. Taylor, who was in your group?
Devin, Daniel, and Vale.
Devin, Daniel, and Vale. Okay. Since y'all had 4, give us the second one.
Gallbladder cancer.
Gallbladder. Okay, we got our first one that we do not have for my in-class group. Who do we think is right? In class, y'all think gallbladder or no?
No.
No, Randy's like, no, absolutely not. No to gallbladder? Okay. So a good guess, Taylor, a good guess. Gallbladder is not on the 10 most common. All right. All right. Adriana.
Yeah,
All right. Give us one.
we had prostate cancer.
Okay. Prostate. Good. And give me another one.
Thyroid, I think we said.
Fibroid.
Yeah.
Where is fibroid cancer? Where is that located? Oh,
Like in
thyroid?
the-
I'm sorry, you
the
said
throat.
thyroid. Yeah,
Yeah.
throat. Okay, thyroid. Sorry, I heard fibroid. I'm like, what's a fibroid cancer? Okay. Because you could have a fibroid and it can look a lot like a tumor in those ways. My wife has a uterine fibroid that we had to worry about when she was pregnant. Okay, let's see. What else did we not mention? No, somebody said skin. Anybody have ovarian? I think he said lung. I should have made a list. I should have written it down. Hey, look, there we go. Cameron just put theirs on there. Breast, lung, prostate, colon, bone, kidney, ovarian, thyroid. Almost the exact same list. All right, well, let's reveal the ones that are the most common. All right. I'm gonna share the screen again. Let's see what the actual answer is. We'll see. Anybody just okay. If we look at incidence, so this is the idea of the ones that occur the most common. These are data that are a little bit old, but they've been relatively stable. Okay. And this is an important distinction to make. We call it female breast cancer. Occasionally you can have breast cancer in men. Okay. But breast cancer is the most common kind of cancer. Prostate cancer is the next highest. Okay. Those two are going to account for, roughly half of kind of all sorts of cancers that are going to be out there, are breast and prostate. Okay. Lung cancer, colorectal cancer, okay, are the next two. Melanoma in the skin, all right. Bladder, nobody put bladder, okay. Nobody that we had. Bladder cancer, thyroid, kidney, and what we call non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Please don't ask me what Hodgkin's lymphoma is, because I'm not 100% sure. Okay. So thyroid is very common, pretty easy to treat. Breast cancer, prostate are reasonably easy to treat as well. Okay. So our in-class list was skin, breast, prostate, ovarian, leukemia, which is actually not on there. Leukemia tends to be relatively high in kids. Brain cancers, luckily, are not that high. You guys had colon. You guys had pancreatic, which we'll talk about that. Pancreatic is not, I believe, Kelly was the one that was saying he thought pancreatic was pretty rare, that it was really bad. Was it you? Did you mention that earlier? Or was it Ramsey? No. It was Phoebe. You did that. Sorry. Okay. When I'm looking in another direction and somebody says something with a mouse on it, I'm like, who said what? So my apologies, but y'all are very much right about all of that. Okay. Let's see how we did on the deadly ones. All right. So let's go back. We'll try folks from a different group. Lana, are you there?
Wait, did you say my name? Yeah, I'm
I did
here.
say your name, yes.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. Do you have an animal to show us, Lana?
I do not, unfortunately.
Okay, that's all right. So give us what you guys thought was the deadliest cancer.
We put melanoma.
Put melanoma, okay? Okay, y'all put melanoma. All right, So I'm gonna circle that. Our in-class group put that at number 5. Okay. You guys said number 1. Dan, did y'all put that? Y'all have melanoma on your list? Did you have it at number 1? Okay. Dan can't talk, he's just typing. Yes and no. Okay, so yes on the list, no, not number 1. Okay. Melanoma is a good guess, but it is not number 1. It's not number 1. Okay. Devin, what did your group put as number 1?
We said brain cancer.
You said brain.
Yes.
Okay. Another reasonable guess. Also not number 1. Not number 1. Let me think here. In our other sorts of groups, I apologize if I'm forgetting who is in what group. Madison, is your group going already? Were you in Devin's group?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Vale.
I was in Devon's. We said brain.
We're also in Devin's group. Okay. Cameron.
Yes.
So you guys, who was in your group? You guys thought brain cancer was the deadliest?
We put on most deadly, I guess in the ranking, it was liver, but in my personal opinion, I think perhaps lung.
Perhaps lung. Okay. So you guys are all making good guesses. Okay. You're all making good guesses. You're all wrong. Okay. You're all wrong. And so this is where this gets to be a little bit complicated and a little bit unexpected and strange. Okay. So if we do all of this, if we look at, okay, death rates, this is where Cameron is right about saying lung. Okay. If we look at all of these, if we look at the rate of death per 100,000 people that have that particular cancer. So this is the number of people that get something, how many of them die. What we see is that lung cancer is the deadliest. Okay, lung cancer is the deadliest. Breast and prostate are the second deadliest. Okay, and then we're going to move our way down. Weirdly, if you talk to people, pancreatic cancer is quite rare, but pretty deadly. Okay, and so a lot of the times, if you look at just the absolute numbers of deaths, what you see is that breast cancer and prostate cancer cause the most number of deaths every year, and that's because they are by far the most common. Okay? They are by far the most common. So things for us to keep in mind. And hopefully what you guys can see from the breast and prostate and the colorectal, sort of 2, 3, and 4 on here, is that these are all things that can be positively affected by exercise and not being obese. Okay? All right, so let's go here and we'll finish off today talking about how we can use exercise and physical activity to potentially lower our risks of developing certain kinds of cancers. Okay, so for some cancers, exercise is good. For a lot of them, it's not. Okay, but for some, and luckily for us, it's some of the ones that are kind of the most common and the deadliest. It potentially can be. So one of the things that we know that exercise does, and this is going to seem weird to you guys, is that exercise can potentially help moderate hormone levels. Okay, it can moderate insulin, testosterone, and estrogen levels. All 3 of these hormones promote tissue growth. And so if we can keep those things in check a little bit better, then we're kind of in a more regular pattern with exercise, that may be helpful. We know there's an interaction between those hormones and adiposity, especially. Weight less so, but definitely adiposity. Okay, especially in women, higher levels of body fat interact with estrogen and lead to breast cancer. Okay. Related to insulin, something called insulin-like growth factor and its binding protein also promotes tissue growth. Exercise helps us to kind of regulate IGF-1. Okay. It helps to potentially improve immune function. We'll talk about that in a minute. And then for colorectal cancer, the big thing that exercise does, which is mildly related to our things in discussion during the break, is that what it does is it decreases intestinal transit time. What this means in a very crass way is the more you exercise, the faster things move through your intestines and the more you have to poop. Okay. What that does is by decreasing transit time is there is less time for any toxic chemicals or carcinogenic chemicals or things in your food to have an effect on the intestinal or colon cells, and therefore that can potentially reduce the risk of any mutations. Okay. So this is one of the most powerful things that we're going to see, is a decrease in colorectal cancer risk. Okay. So we do know in some ways, and Dr. Pinku put this together, and I thought it was in some ways kind of genius. And so here we know that obesity is associated with increased levels of breast cancer, endometrial cancer, and colorectal cancer. And so if we think of, everyone thinks of smoking, but then the next kind of biggest way to prevent, especially these cancers, is to limit obesity. So he took, here we've got cigarettes in a McDonald's and a French fry kind of thing. It's sort of the gist being that if you eat too many McDonald's French fries, then you're going to be obese. I don't really care. They're the best French fries. Give me the French fries. Okay, but that's kind of where we are. All right, I know I shouldn't say those kinds of things, but I do like McDonald's French fries especially. Okay, so here's some data from the CDC. And this is new rate of obesity-related cancers by type. Okay, and so what I want you guys to see is that all obesity-related cancers are going to be here. This is the rate per 100,000 people. So this is kind of the average. But in a lot of instances, obesity-related cancers are going to result in postmenopausal breast cancer. So we tend to see different things that cause breast cancer pre and post menopause. Okay, pre and post menopause. Okay, so all right. We talked about these two kinds of things. We talked about decrease in transit time. Let's talk about immune function. Okay. Moderate levels of exercise improve immune system function. Okay. If you exercise some or even a fair amount, you have a better functioning immune system than a person that's sedentary. If you exercise too much, you people know who you are. Okay. 6-7 days per week, prolonged periods of time, okay, then you can actually hinder immune function. But one of the ways that the body catches cancerous cells in the early stages is through good immune function. And so when exercise promotes immune function, then that can be potentially a positive thing. Okay, so I'm going to stop for a minute. We'll go back to this. Let me talk about breast cancer. Okay. We see in women with breast cancer, there's about a mean 20% reduction in relative risk of all of these things. So this works better when we're in class, and I don't actually ask people to stand up and do this, but I could, if I wanted to, ladies, I could line you all up in class, okay, by how old you were when you had your first menstrual period. And that is as good a predictor, okay, as anything else that we can ask you about your risk of developing, especially premenopausal breast cancer. Okay. One of the reasons that this is the case, Okay, and this is one of the ways that exercise, especially ladies, y'all are past this point now, but especially when you're younger, can potentially be protective of breast cancer risk, is the number of anovulatory menstrual cycles that you have, the lower your risk of developing breast cancer. So what that means is the one woman in the world who's probably never going to develop breast cancer is the woman that is the wife of Jim Bob Duggar. You guys know who the Duggars are? They live in Springdale, Arkansas. They have like 22 kids. She's basically at this point like spent the entirety of her childbearing years. She's been pregnant like her whole adult life. Okay? When you are pregnant, you don't have a menstrual cycle. You do not ovulate. So because of that, that's very protective of developing breast cancer. Okay? So ladies, those of you that were older, whenever you had your first menstrual period, you have had fewer cycles than those of you that had your first menstrual period when you were younger. Right? Also, for a not so great reason, people that are more active, right? Women that are more active, and they have low percent body fat, and may become amenorrheic, you may stop having your period. That's not a healthy thing. I'm not promoting that in any way, shape, or form, but it means you've had fewer actual ovulatory cycles, and that means someone's protected. Okay? So I find that to be kind of a wild sort of thing. There is evidence that suggests that adolescent women, or I guess we would call them girls or prepubescent girls, that are more active tend to have their first period at a later age. They're older when they have their first period. They tend to have more anovulatory cycles in kind of early, kind of post-puberty times as well. We don't really understand that. But that's one of the things that we can do. One of the ways that we can try to predict from all of those things. Okay. All right. Questions about all of that? No? Okay. There it is. That's fine. All right, guys, from a prostate cancer. Can I ask you a question? No. Okay. So in men, we can see a small reduction in prostate cancer risk if you exercise, but you have to exercise a huge amount. Okay, a huge amount. And so what happens is when you do a large amounts of physical activity, you begin to decrease testosterone levels. And so what we're gonna see from all of that is if you can reduce testosterone levels, then that will limit your chance of developing prostate cancer. Additionally, men that develop prostate cancer early, it may be genetic, and then later it may be lifestyle kind of things. I think there may be some relations of obesity with prostate cancer kind of later on. Okay. There's some weird things with lung cancer. Like pancreatic cancer, lung cancer is really bad. It's really nasty. You get damage to lung tissue. It doesn't repair itself very well, right? If you get lung cancer and it's bad, you're probably going to die. You get pancreatic cancer and it's bad, you're probably just going to die. It's very, very sad. But we do see some decrease in relative risk with increases in physical activity. Now, part of this is confounded by smoking. You might think that people that exercise more aren't going to smoke as often, and that's very true, okay? But even if we control for smoking, there does still seem to be some potentially positive effects of increased physical activity, okay? And one of the things that it may do is that we know that people that do aerobic exercise are going to inhibit partially, okay? They're going to inhibit a pathway that signals through something called mTOR, okay? mTOR is the genetic kind of hub that drives the proliferation of muscle mass, right? mTOR stands for mammalian target of rapamycin. It's a thing that if you give somebody rapamycin, which is an antibiotic, it will inhibit mTOR, and you can basically keep them from getting their muscles bigger. But there may be something, especially in lung cells, where being more physically active begins to inhibit mTOR, which may prevent some kind of further proliferation in those cells. So we're doing a lot of stuff in the midst of all of this. This is one of the big things At the Health Science Center in Oklahoma City, we have a place called the Stevenson Cancer Center. And a lot of folks in our department, we are working on some collaborations with the folks up there. They're especially interested in pancreatic cancer and also trying to use exercise as either a preventative or as what we call an adjuvant treatment during chemotherapy and radiation therapy. Because what happens when we treat cancer, people lose muscle. They get nerve damage, they lose muscle. Because they lose muscle, they become more sedentary. The cardiovascular function goes down, and then they become obese. And so we save them from the cancer, but then they all get cardiovascular disease and die for those reasons. So we're working on some things like that. They have lots of labs and volunteer opportunities and internship opportunities if people are those are the recommendations. So there we have it. Okay. And that's it. So for the most part, exercise good for certain forms of cancer, especially breast, endometrial, prostate. All right, so for my folks that were in your groups, please send me your list and who was in your group. I'm gonna snap a photo of who was in class so that I can remember. And then we'll just see you guys next week. Okay. So remember, we will have class on Monday. We will not have class on